Everyone, and welcome. I am joined today by Fyodor Lukyanov, research professor at the Higher School of Economics, the editor-in-chief at the Russia in Global Affairs Journal, also research director at the Valdai Discussion Club, as many of you know him from as well, is his interviews with President Putin every year at the Valdai meeting. And I'm very happy to speak with you today because I wanted to discuss how and why the US-Russia relations appear to be transforming. Indeed, you just published an article with the title Putin and Trump Usher in Era of New Diplomacy, and I will put a link to it in the description. And you wrote that what once appeared to be impossible is happening. So what is happening and how can we explain this?
Thank you very much. Hello to everybody. Yes, it's true that 2 months ago, very few of us could imagine that kind of intensity of talks and depth of talks between Moscow and Washington, because we actually forgot how it can be. For many, many years, if not decades, diplomacy actually, on many levels, but in particular on the level between the United States and Russia, did mean not the open-ended process of negotiations, bargaining, discussions, exchanges of interest, explanations of mutual interest, and so on. What we knew as the classical diplomacy in previous centuries, actually, that has been forgotten or dismissed because in the so-called liberal international order, which was based on the assumption that there is one side which knows how to live and what should be done to achieve this performance of life. It was no room for discussion and no room for bargaining for very simple conceptual reasons. Really, if you believe that you know exactly how everything should be, how everything should work, and what are interests of all other parts as well, so you formulate it, then the only contents of diplomacy might be not how to make mutual compromises, how to approach the other's part demands or interests, but just the opposite. Diplomacy was about how quick and on which maybe small conditions the counterpart will take the position of the United States and the West. Again, for conceptual reasons, it's not about imperialism, it's about ideology. Because if we, the West, are on the right side of history, it cannot be bargaining with the wrong side of history, naturally. So that's the question, whether countries on the wrong side will realize that and go to other side and then accept what we say, or if they insist on their demands, then they are wrong states, wrong people, wrong countries, and there is no bargaining either. So sorry for this long expose, but now situation is different. Now the American side, embodied by Trump and his team, they assume that diplomacy is about bargaining and deals, which is no guarantee for success at all, but it's completely different kind of discussion. This is a discussion which accepts that other side can have interests and right to defend it.
I think you're correct in terms of the ideology. Indeed, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, he's argued for, well, almost 20 years now, I think, that diplomacy largely ended after the Cold War because it was replaced with ultimatums and threats. And this was, to a large extent, built on ideology, because why would you have diplomacy, mutual understanding, and compromise if there is one side that has the solution? So security, as we also recognize in Western scholarship, that diplomacy was redefined more as between an object and a subject, or between the teacher and the student. So why would the student or the teacher make a compromise with the student? This is almost a betrayal of values. One should civilize the other side. This was the basic idea, no matter how arrogant it may sound. And but do you see only ideology here, or is it only some called hard geopolitics? Because when I hear people like Marco Rubio now, or even to some, well, Vance maybe more on the ideological side, but Marco Rubio, he speaks of a multipolar world in which there has to be other rules in terms of how you engage with other great powers. Do you see this recognition and the concern about Russia and China getting too close as being a key variable as well?
Absolutely. Mark Rubio is not the guy who previously belonged to this ideological circle of Trump. So we remember him very well from his previous activities as a member of the US Congress. And he used to be rather neoconservative. So now we see that probably he realized that the Trumpian approach might bring US to better results on the world stage. And yes, indeed, of course, it's very unusual to hear from the State Secretary of the United States that the world has become multipolar. So we never heard it before. That's really a revolution. Yes, indeed, I think that this team understands that this super hegemony is over. It doesn't mean that they deny the right of the United States to be the absolutely mightiest and most important country in the world, but the purpose is different. Because before them, after the Cold War until recently, the hegemony or leadership, whatever you call it, did mean that Americans were creating the international framework and served as watchers of how others stick to this framework. So it was about global governance, actually. Trump denies it completely. He doesn't want United States to be global watcher, global guardian of anything, whatever it might be. He is about national interest, sometimes very rudely, even brutally, primitively understood, but it's not about any kind of responsibility. Of course, it might look sometimes like a classical imperialism, American imperialism. The positive side of it is that he sees other great powers, not many of them, but some of them. And he believes that with those great powers, it should be a serious discussion, not necessarily war. Much better not to have war with them, but to try to achieve mutually acceptable solutions, of course, which would serve American interests at the first phase. But still, again, coming back to my first remark, it's completely different approach, which opens up for some kind of negotiations, which was not the case before. And another thing which I would stress, what changed. American side actually accepted the position or the proposal, which Russian side offered since very long time. On the highest level, Putin said it many, many times. He said that we are ready to discuss anything, including the most difficult issues like Ukraine, but we cannot expect that, for example, Ukrainian issue can be resolved separately from all the rest. So first, we need to profoundly transform the relationship between Russia and the United States, the atmosphere, approaches, and then as part of the bigger reshuffle of this relationship, Ukrainian issue can be solved much easier. And now what we see is that Americans basically accepted that. So there is no discussion about Ukraine only. There's discussion about broader sphere of our relationship, including many, many issues. I noticed with big interest that in the American readout of recent phone call, the American side emphasized that they discussed the Middle East. The Russian side didn't. What does it mean? It means for me a very interesting, a very new thing. For Trump, by default, the Middle East, for many reasons, in the first line because of Israel, but for many other reasons, this is the first class priority, the highest priority. Ukraine is lesser priority than the Middle East. For Russia, that's the opposite. The Middle East is important for Russia, but Ukraine is much more important. And when you can formulate priorities which are diverging but have different weight on different sides, then you have space for productive exchanges, I would say so.
No, this reshuffle is very interesting because, if you look at Russia's main security concerns and how the source of conflicts are identified between the West and Russia for the past 30 plus years, it's been the failure to establish this mutually acceptable security architecture after the Cold War. Again, by incrementally moving NATO and its military infrastructure to the east, so effectively reviving the zero-sum logic of the Cold War. But this was to a large extent intended to facilitate this global primacy of the United States, which it based its security strategy on. And of course, this is what also brought us to the war in Ukraine, quite predictably so. But given that the United States is willing to do this great compromises with Russia, and again, not just look at Ukraine as separate from this, but again, part of this wider need to reorganize relations. Well, how will this? Where would this leave NATO? Because if we listen to Hegseth when he says no NATO territorial concessions have to be accepted and no security guarantees, what is the role of NATO if it's not collective hegemony and if it's not a tool only to use to weaken Russia? Do you see the very foundation of NATO also being questioned here? Because I haven't seen any readout from the Americans, but I've seen the sidekick of Trump, Elon Musk, take on Twitter arguing that, why do we still have NATO? It's outdated. So how, again, one shouldn't speculate or read too much into it. But given that there's this huge reshuffle, the main sticky point between the Americans and the Russians is surely NATO as this instrument of hegemony, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. It's probably the most interesting and most significant question about the European security architecture, because after the end of the Cold War, the security architecture, I simplify, but if we formulate the very core of the idea which prevailed, the security architecture was as such. NATO is equal to security. The more NATO, the more security in Europe. Full stop. And of course, Russia was not very much enthusiastic about that from the very beginning. But in the first stage, Russia was too weak to resist. And then step by step, the Russian unsatisfaction started to grow. Now, again, paradoxically, some of Americans, at least some of them, come to conclusions which have been formulated by Russian side for many, many years and many, many times. In particular, what you just said, that what is NATO about now? That was a very efficient, I must say, instrument of the Cold War. The Cold War is over for many decades. The instrument which Russia, at that time Soviet Union, had, the Warsaw Pact, has been dismantled immediately. Why NATO? So what we heard for decades after 1990, after Paris Charter for New Europe, was that NATO is not about, actually not so much about military. It was about spreading democracy, it's about securing stability and so on. Now we are back to the initial idea of NATO. That's a military alliance, which might make sense. Why not? So I don't discuss the reality of Russian threat to Europe, but if Europeans believe that Russia is a threat, then that's they can do it. It's their right to perceive things in this way. But then the question is, yes, okay, let's assume that Russia is threatening Europe. Why should the United States be involved in that? Russia is not threatening the United States except the hypothetical nuclear war, and the nuclear war can be caused exactly because of NATO. And that's the position of several Americans. I assume that even President Trump can have something like this idea. And then the next question, the logical question is, okay, maybe Europeans should, if they want a regional military alliance, they need to make it. Why not? It was, as you certainly remember, it was an organization after the Second World War, which was called Western European Union, something like a prototype of a military structure of Europeans. Okay, go ahead. But the problem is that Europeans are scared, Europeans are nervous, Europeans want to be protected. They say we can do it ourselves. They repeat actually the famous phrase of Angela Merkel, wir schaffen das, we can make it. But there is no base. There is there are no resources, no money, no military capacity, nothing, and no big willingness among population to invest heavily in defense against Russia. In some countries, yes, but I don't know, but I doubt that people in Portugal or Ireland or somewhere else in Europe will be happy to spend most of money on defense against Russia. And then, yes, we arrive to a very conceptual question. What can be guarantees for European security? Again, I speak about Europeans. I don't speak now about Russia, because Russia has formulated, we have formulated our needs many, many times before. And there are two ways, actually. The same question, same dilemma as for Ukraine. One way is to be militarized and to be prepared for anything and to prepare for war with Russia all the time. Fair enough. Another way is to launch a serious, in-depth discussion with Russia about security, and then come to some conclusion how to achieve this security for both sides. The so-called inclusive security, or what was the indivisible security, which has been written down in the Paris Charter for New Europe 35 years ago. Europeans' choice is the first way, the former. Okay, then we can expect that Russia will do the same. If we, after this conflict, after the end of this war, because of Russian-American rapprochement, arrive to the situation that Europeans will understand that they need to try something else but militarization, I think Russia will not be against at all. Because for Russia, I put aside all those stupid ideas that Russians would love to march to Paris or to La Manche and so on. That's simply undoable. Even if Russia would like to do it, it's unavailable for next 100 years or so. And if we want to discuss real security issues, which do exist in the Eastern Europe, in the Southern Europe, in the Northern Europe, Baltic area, which is not far away from you, then you see on the Russian-American example, it can be done, but you should change the optic a little bit.
Yeah. Well, yeah, threats are usually assessed by intentions and capabilities. And no, you're right. I don't see on Russia neither the intention or the capability of marching on Paris. So, but again, I think there's a bit of panic going on in Europe, and I agree with what you said. I think a key problem of the unipolar order was that, well, usually states are security maximizers. That is, you only expand your power until you're checked, and then you find a compromise. Otherwise, you undermine your security. But in unipolarity, power is security. So if you maximize power, you maximize security. If you think the dominance is the source of security, but I guess this shift is difficult, which just leads me to my last question. How well, you can see that the Americans are proving to be very pragmatic, making this huge shift. My interpretation, again, they're adjusting to multipolarity. But in Europe, I get the feeling that here the Cold War mentality is very hardwired. It's deeply ingrained into the cognitive pattern here. Uh, so, how can this be explained? Is it the Europeans don't have different political, they don't have the political alternatives as the United States to change course? Is it still the ideology, or how does this make sense? Because a lot of the talk coming, especially out of London and Paris these days, it doesn't really correspond to reality, as you said. They want to use money they don't have to build weapons which can't be built for the next decade, and all to confront Russia, which is again the largest nuclear power in the world. So it's not clear exactly how they're defining defeat of Russia, and they don't like Trump's peace initiative, but they don't have any other alternatives besides Ukraine joining NATO and Russia paying compensation. So it's very unrealistic, which the results and it's very bad for Europe because this unrealistic expectation makes both Washington and Moscow exclude Europe, and the Europeans surely have an interest to have a voice as well. So how you're explaining a lot of this behavior? Why can't we, I mean, the Europeans, be more like the Americans on this?
I think that the problem for Europeans is not the problem, it's the di different nature of this international actor. It's not a state. We might be very negative and critical about any states, be it United States, be it Russia, be it China, whatever. But states can take decisions and implement decisions. They might take wrong decisions. It happens pretty frequently. But anyway, that's the decision which can be made, can be corrected, can be cancelled, and so on. In case of the European Union or European part of NATO, there's not a state. There is a collection of different entities. Some of them are used to be great powers. Some others, just the opposite, used to be victims of great powers, including those who are in this community now. And it cannot, the unity of this union cannot reach the point beyond which this group of countries operates as a single actor with a clear aim and capacity to take decisions and implement decisions. Again, even wrong ones. And that brings me to the conclusion, which might be wrong because I'm far away from Europe for quite a long time now. We have not so many contacts. But my conclusion would be that there is simply undoable. It's impossible to do what political leaders in London, in Paris, in Berlin, in Vilnius, in Warsaw state. It's simply not available. And if so, and I assume that it will become more and more visible to everybody pretty soon. If so, then I would guess that in case Russia and the United States will strike a deal on Ukraine and broader on a new quality of relationship, Europeans will have no choice but to join to, not to Russia, but to join to join the American ally, the American senior partner, because they simply have no capacity to formulate a policy, which in this case will be against both Russia and the United States. That's important. That Europe cannot be neutral in this new constellation if it comes. Europe will be against both parts, against Atlantic ally and against Eurasian enemy. I don't see any moral vigor on the European side to be in this position. That's why I believe that in case of agreement, again, agreement is not is not granted. So we don't know what happens. It might end up very badly as well because huge superpowers they can disagree and that might be fatal. But in case it will work, then for Europe it will be no alternative but to support Americans and try to adapt to their policies, but also try to maybe achieve some concessions from Americans to take into account their position. We will see. So far, actually, I don't think that many people here in Russia take European statements seriously, but there are people, including very prominent experts, who believe, unlike me, that European this potential for destruction is bigger than we think, and that Europeans should be, so to say, terrified even more to prevent them from doing something to undermine, for example, Russian-American relationship. I don't know. That's another discussion. But again, my position and my view at this point is that I don't see any independent line for Europe available in the foreseeable future.
I agree, and I also think in a multipolar world, the national interest becomes even more divergent, and without a liberal hegemonic ideology or the Russian boogeyman in almost a direct war to push together unity, there's a lot of room for fragmenting. But anyways, I've already taken enough of your time. So any
by
final
the way,
comments?
just one thing. You mentioned national interest, and I think it's very important detail. You're absolutely right. That's a world where national interests will dominate. It might be good, it might be very bad. So we know periods from history where national interest brought all of us to disasters. But anyway, that's a new stage. European Union cannot have national interest by default. And that's the problem, because in the world where national interests define everything, what such an structure, such an entity, which operates against national interests of member states, how it can survive? That's a very interesting question for me.
Fyodor Lukyanov, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.